Now, I'm not suggesting that here in the United States we're headed directly towards Soviet-style communism, although there are some who would suggest that maybe we are. I do know, however, that we're headed down a very dangerous road toward a place that I don't want to go, and a place that I don't think many of you want to go either, and that road is the road to socialism. And I realize that there are some differences between socialism and communism, although over history, many have used the terms almost interchangeably. And some believe that socialism is nothing more than a transitional stage between capitalism and communism. However you want to look at it, one thing's certain, and that's that socialism and communism are based on some very similar philosophies and ideas. That being said, all Americans need to be aware of what's happening in our country right now.
Amen.
And I'm not talking only about the policies of our current president, although he's certainly taken us much further down this road than we've ever been before. But we need to understand that we did not just begin to travel down this road since the last election. We've been traveling down this road for many, many years. And over those years, there have been many people who we could have and should have been listening to. Some of them were socialists and communists themselves, predicting what would one day happen in the United States. Others were former communists and even patriotic Americans, warning us about what could happen if we didn't pay attention. Norman Thomas was one of the socialists who predicted what would someday happen in our country. Norman Thomas was an American socialist. He ran for president 6 times on the Socialist Party of America ticket. The current website of the Social Democrats USA tells us that Thomas predicted what would happen when he said the American people will never knowingly adopt socialism. But under the name of liberalism, they will adopt every fragment of the socialist program until one day America will be socialist and not even know how it happened. Ronald Reagan called that creeping socialism. And it's evident today that socialism has, in fact, been creeping into our society for over 60 years. Since 1935, government programs have been enacted to provide retirement income and supplemental security income, unemployment insurance and cash welfare payments, food stamps, Medicaid, Medicare, Medicare prescription drugs, school breakfast, school lunch, after-school snacks, public housing assistance, home weatherization assistance, telephone assistance, energy assistance, and that's just to name a few. Some argue that if we were truly Christian, we wouldn't mind paying higher taxes so that the government could fund more of these programs to help the poor. Ladies and gentlemen, don't fall for that argument. That's an argument designed just to guilt us into accepting the very political philosophy that's gotten us into this mess. Fred Thompson said it best, I think, when he said, Christ didn't tell us to go to the government and pass a bill to take care of some of these social problems. He told us to just do it. Charity is not when you take somebody else's money by force and then use that to help those in need. Charity is when we use our own money voluntarily to help those in need. And the fact of the matter is, many of you here and many in the Tea Party movement across this country are some of the most charitable people in the world. We just believe that we know better than government what constitutes a wise and charitable use of our money. For example, our government recently spent $2.6 million of our tax money to find out whether consuming alcohol on the job increases the spread of AIDS among prostitutes in China. Does that sound like a wise and charitable use of our money? We spent $400,000 to study risky sexual behavior among gay men in bars in Argentina. Does that sound like a wise and charitable use of our money? We give $350 million every year to Planned Parenthood. This is an organization that performs over 300,000 abortions per year. That's over 800 abortions every single day. Does that sound like a wise and charitable use of our money? No. Our government's spending nearly $3 million to finance green and efficient buildings in China. $53 million on Acorn. They spent over $100,000 to study the use of ecstasy, LSD, and other party drugs in Brazil. $200,000 for a tattoo removal program in California, and they spent $100 million on flight tickets that they never used and never bothered to collect a refund for, even though the tickets were refundable. Does any of this sound to you like a wise and charitable use of our money? Norman Thomas's words seem almost prophetic, because socialism has, in fact, been creeping bit by bit into our society. And once these entitlements become enacted, We become dependent on them, but we don't want to give them up. And then the socialists have us right where they want us. And ladies and gentlemen, I hate to say it, but we're almost there. Last year, a Rasmussen poll indicated that only 53% of all American adults now believe that capitalism is better than socialism. And among adults under the age of 30, that number is only 37%. So how did we go from a country that believed in individual responsibility and individual freedom, that hard work and perseverance were the keys to success, and that, as John F. Kennedy said in his inaugural address, the rights of man come not from the generosity of the state, but from the hand of God? How do we go from that to a country where a sizable proportion of our population now believe that socialism is better? Part of the answer, of course, is that so many of our citizens have become dependent on these government programs that I mentioned, and upon others just like them. I'm not saying that any of these programs, in and of themselves, are necessarily bad, or that those who enacted them were insincere in their intent, or that there's never a need for assistance. But too many of these programs have gone far beyond their intended purpose of providing temporary assistance to the point of destroying individual incentive and ambition. Abraham Lincoln once said, "You cannot build character and courage by taking away a man's initiative and independence. You cannot help men permanently by doing for them what they could and should do for themselves." The intent of these programs might have been to help lift the poor up out of poverty. But instead, most of these programs have sentenced the poor to a lifetime of poverty. And now we have, in some cases, several generations of families who have known nothing other than government assistance. But it's not only the growing dependency on these programs that has gotten us to this point. There's something else going on, something much more subtle that we need to be aware of. Some of you may be familiar with a man by the name of Yuri Bezmenov, but for those who are not, let me give you a quick little background. Yuri Bezmenov is an ex-Soviet KGB agent who defected to the West in 1970. Not because of any mistreatment that he personally had suffered under communism. Bezmenov said that he never suffered under communism, that most doors were open to him because he was the son of a high-ranking Soviet military officer. Bezmenov's reason for defecting, he said, was what he called moral protest against the inhumane methods of the Soviet system. So Bezmenov defected in 1970, and then in the 1980s he began to give a series of lectures and interviews on what the Soviets called ideological subversion. This was a type of psychological warfare used by the Soviets in an attempt to gain control over Western society. Bezmenov explained that this process was divided into 4 stages. The first stage was a very long stage. It was called demoralization, and it took from 15 to 20 years. The question is, why so long? Listen carefully to Bezmenov's answer to that question. He said that the process of demoralization took 15 to 20 years because that was the minimum number of years required to educate one generation of students in the country of your enemy. And when Bezmenov said educate, he was not talking only about our public schools and universities, although that certainly was a part of it. He said that he was also talking about the destruction of traditional moral values. In fact, he said most of the demoralization process was done by Americans to Americans because of lack of moral standards. Think about what we learned from Hollywood, from the music industry, from overindulgent sports stars and other cultural icons. We certainly have had a lack of moral standards for a long time in this country. In addition to the lack of traditional moral values, Bezmenov, of course, was also talking about what students learn in our public high schools and universities. In too many of these institutions, self-esteem is taught instead of personal responsibility. Effort is rewarded instead of results, and students are taught to question authority rather than to respect it. Bezmenov pointed out that those who were educated in the 1960s are the ones now in positions of power, and that these people have been programmed to think and to react in a certain way. To them, he said, true information and true facts no longer matter. Now let me ask you a question. Have you ever had a discussion with someone about a current issue and that person just seemed incapable of comprehending common sense and logic? I think many of us have had those discussions. And it's always perplexed me. A person who you know is a highly intelligent person, yet they can't seem to recognize facts when they're right there in front of them. Some of these people vote on emotion, oftentimes for a candidate who represents the antithesis of everything that voter even believes in. It doesn't make any sense, but maybe this process that Besmanoff has talked about helps to explain at least some of that.